for being able to contribute to this debate, on which I congratulate the honourable gentleman, not only for bringing it to the House, but for the measured way he introduced it. It's good to hear someone offering a balanced view about immigration, and I have good news for him. I'm not frightened or nervous about speaking about it for fear of being labelled. Indeed, I've been speaking about it for a very long time and will continue to do so. And the plain fact of the matter is that this country has had far too much immigration for far too long. Much of the debate recently has focused on illegal immigration, understandably so. 150,000 people across the Channel. That number's risen since last summer, and people see our borders breached with impunity and perfectly properly regard that as a challenge to the very rule of law. Curious, isn't it, that many of the people now are coming from Vietnam. Before that, it was Albania. There's not much evidence that these people are fleeing from those countries which we know persecute people because they are tyrannical. The truth is that many of them are economic migrants. And let me say a word about that, Madam Chairman, because if you were in a part of the world which, if not God-forsaken, for nowhere is that, was certainly less advantaged than this one, it would be unsurprising that you'd want a better life for you and your family, and you might well become an economic migrant if you felt you could do so without cost. Although, of course, in this case, the cost is substantial, because they pay people, smugglers, great sums of money to get here, knowing that once they get here, the chances are they will never leave. C.S. Lewis said that failures are finger posts on the road to achievement. Well, one certainly hopes so, because successive governments have failed to deal with illegal immigration and failed to recognise that legal immigration is a much greater problem still. For all of the awfulness of our borders being breached, the scale of legal migration, the effect that has on population growth, which I shall deal with in a few moments, is so immense that it dwarfs the challenge and problem of those people coming here across the Channel. ONS figures now suggest that our population will surge, and that most of that increase is a direct result of migration. The scale of migration is so great now that it is impossible to build sufficient houses to meet demand. It is impossible to provide health care in the sort of numbers our population is increasing by. Let me give some figures to illustrate my point. In 2023, the net migration of this country, this is not about people coming and leaving, this is the net figure, was 866,000. Even the most ambitious government, a government exceeding all previous records, might build 250,000 houses a year, perhaps 300,000. And the net population growth through migration in a single year was 866,000. The year before, 822,000. The year before, 250, and so on. This is an entirely new phenomenon, by the way. If you look back to the period running up to the mid-90s, migration was basically imbalanced. Some years more people left, more people arrived. So migration was, broadly speaking, in balance. In an advanced country, people will always come and people will always leave. And it's right they should be able to do so, subject to certain conditions, of course, in terms of the people arriving, that is. But the change, the dramatic change, has swelled our population very rapidly, very quickly. And no country could cope with that sort of population growth without very serious consequences for public services. And I'll turn in a second or two to the other consequences, and the honourable gentleman touched upon them, actually. But let's just deal with the economic arguments, because he rightly said the justification for this has usually been economic. We needed these people to fill jobs that others couldn't do. I can remember when I was in attending the Cabinet, David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, said about his policy to reduce migration to tens of thousands, that it seemed only he and the Home Secretary believed in it, because every time he went to Cabinet, one or more Cabinet Ministers would plead a special case We need more health workers. We need more construction workers. We need more farm workers. We need more dentists. We need more doctors. We need more nurses. Who don't we need? And in fact, every single department was pleading that they were a special case, such that the policy was almost impossible to pursue, to achieve. And that's the problem we've had. And that problem ignores the point I made to the Honourable Gentleman. He's right. As I said, he made an extremely balanced case, if I might say so. He's right to say that an enormous number of people are admitting on work visas. From June 2024, 270,000 workers were brought in to work in healthcare. But as a result, they brought 377,000 dependents, almost none of whom would have worked in health or care, many of whom would have depended on the provision of health and care, perfectly understandably. This wasn't meeting an economic need, this was creating an economic demand. I give way to the old gentleman who looks like a bespectacled economist, so I'm slightly nervous.
Thank you. I'm not sure if that was an insult or not, Chair. Firstly, I should declare an interest by when we talk about healthcare workers by saying that back in 2015, an overseas healthcare worker did save my life, my cardiologist, and I've put on record my thanks to him. But the Honourable Gentleman will know is without immigration, population in the UK is falling. And not only is it falling, we're getting older as well, and I'm evidence of that. And without workers coming into the country, particularly for our healthcare system, we would be stuck. Does he not agree with that point?
Well, let's be clear about population. I'll deal with these points in order, if I might. The first thing is on population. The ONS are clear that net migration is likely to fuel a rise in the UK population to 72.5 million by 2032. Now, when I was a child, for most of my childhood and adolescence, population was somewhere around 57, 58, 59 million. We've never, at any point in our history, had a population of anything like 72.5 million, and that growth has been dramatic in about a generation and a half. And so you can never build infrastructure to cope with that kind of growth. No government could. It's not about a Labour government or a Conservative government or a government from a fringe party. By that I mean the Liberal Democrats, of course. It's about the public service being funded in a way that is feasible, that's tenable. And of course it's true that many people who come into the country do great things. Of course it's true that our population has people from all kinds of places of origin who contribute immensely to our well-being and welfare. But the truth is that the healthcare visa scheme was a palpable and absolute failure. Because if you look at the number of vacancies in that sector during the period I've described, it barely moved. It fell slightly. But by nothing like those numbers, leaving the question, Madam Chairman, what are the people doing now? And what did they do shortly after they arrived? I have to say that my estimation is that many of them were never intending to work in the healthcare sector and were brought into the country by businesses that never intended to work in it either, in honesty. And so that's just a single example of how the arguments about the economy and the values of the economy need to be re-examined and challenged. I spoke earlier about the economic costs that people bring as well as value, but what I didn't speak of, and must be considered, is the displacement effect that migration has on the investment in skills. I was the skills minister, as you know, Madam Chairman, I beg your pardon, and I helped to rejuvenate the apprenticeship system, and under my stewardship we built the biggest number of apprenticeships we've ever had in modern times. And I did that because I believe in investing in vocational and practical and technical competencies, not only to fulfil economic need, but also because many people's aptitudes, tastes and talents take them in that direction. But when we say to businesses, there's no need to invest in training, in recruitment or retention, because you can bring people in from abroad to do those jobs. What incentive, what possible incentive is there to eat into the number of people who find themselves outside the labour market? You know, young people, particularly, I feel for the number of so-called NEETs, those not in education, employment or training, stubbornly high, but just gone up to about 1 million now. These are 16 to 24-year-olds. They deserve better than a system which says, we won't train you, stay on benefits, because there's someone from elsewhere who will do the job that you might be trained to carry out. That's not good government. It's not reasonable. It's not responsible. And so we have to displace immigration and invest in skills rather than the opposite, which is exactly what we've been doing for so long, again, under successive governments. You'll notice I make no apology for the record of previous Conservative governments. I'm being absolutely frank that this has been a failure by the whole of the political establishment, and indeed much of that establishment, drawn as it is from the liberal classes, misunderstands this argument at all. And the honourable gentleman boldly, actually, and I think accurately, drew attention to the gulf between the views and opinions of a very large number of our constituents and those who populate organisations like the Migration Advisory Committee. It's a murky group. I never know quite who's on it or how they got there, but certainly they don't seem terribly sensitive to the kind of arguments that the honourable gentleman advanced when he talked about the frustration which people feel and the fears they feel about the scale of migration for economic reasons. Now, let me say something about the social consequences, because, again, he touched on this in his opening remarks. He touched on the fact that societies work when they cohere, when they have a shared sense of belonging, which draws them together, which mitigates the differences which inevitably prevail in a free society. And that shared sense of belonging is itself dependent on change being relatively gradual. Of course, everywhere changes, life changes, all of our lives individually change, but we can cope with so much change in a human span, and yet we've seen places alter beyond recognition, towns and parts of cities in our country, and it's hard to reconcile that with the maintenance of that sense of belonging. You need to be able to absorb people. You need to be able to share with those people. We need to welcome those people knowing there is something for them to integrate into. In some parts of Britain, there's precious little left to integrate into. It's not fair to the indigenous population, and it's not fair to the incoming people either. It cheats them of their chance to gain that sense of belonging, that sense of Britishness that the honourable gentleman rightly identified as critically important to our collective, our communal well-being. And he's right, that some people are frightened to say that. The people on the Clapham omnibus, I've never been on an omnibus to Clapham. You might have been, Madam Chairman, I haven't, but I can imagine what the people on the Clapham omnibus are like, because they're probably rather like the people on the Spalding omnibus, or even the Boston omnibus. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm most grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Can I urge him to enjoy the pleasures of taking a bus to Clapham? It's a splendid experience.
I'd like to think that my constituency neighbour spent more time in Lincolnshire than he does in Clapham, but and I'm sure he does. But perhaps we could travel together. Perhaps we could have an outing. Perhaps we could have an outing on the Clapham omnibus together. Because as I go about my constituency, and I imagine it's the same in Lichfield, and it'll be the same in many across this House, I hear the frustrations, the feelings of resentment, actually, that so much harm has been done by so many people in power who've been oblivious to that harm. Now, the last government, very belatedly, and after overtures from people like me and the honourable gentleman when he was still in the light before he went into the shade, finally clamped down on some of these abuses. So they They cut the number of work visas in a range of sectors. They reduced the number of dependents that students could bring. That was a preposterous thing, wasn't it? That students could come and bring their families. When you go to study somewhere, you don't go to bring your family. You go specifically for an academic purpose. So that was curbed, and it did have some effect on overall numbers, but it was too little too late. It wasn't sufficient. And it took a lot of hand-wringing even to get to that point. Now I've been sort of half kind to the honourable gentleman. I give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's most generous with his time, especially to a member from a minority party. Thank you for that. But he raises an interesting point about people coming over here to study and bring independence with them. Does he know of any British students that's gone abroad that's took their family with them?
Well, I think the key difference is the type and level of students. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. The honourable gentleman and I rarely disagree, and we certainly don't disagree about this subject very much. If you're studying for a PhD, so if you're coming to work here for a considerable time, and you're looking to build a long-term career in academia here, I can understand why you might want to build a family life here. If you're coming for a shorter course, a master's course, for example, it's pretty hard to see why you'd want to bring your family when you'd expect to go home at the end of it. And most of those people will be very young. So it's unlikely that they'll have children, unlikely that they'll have wives or husbands. So who are these dependents they might be bringing? And I agree with the honourable gentleman. It was preposterous to begin with, and happily in the end we curbed it. I know others want to contribute to the debate, and I don't want to take any longer, except to say this, I suppose, that it's high time that there was a sea change, that we recognise those finger posts on the road to achievement, those failures that successive governments have committed. And whilst I know that an explanation of cause is not a justification by reason, to quote C.S. Lewis again, the cause of this has been a fundamental reluctance to measure the medium and long-term effects of things which in the short term seemed attractive because they dealt with shortages or gaps in the economy. I hope that we can now make the necessary changes. I hope that we can reunite those with power with those who their power effects, that we can re-engage with the population that knows that the premise with which I began my short contribution, that there's been too much immigration into this country for too long, is a widely held view by people who think that enough is enough.